Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. If you're around hunters long enough, you'll start to notice that they use some jargon. Some of it's helpful, some of it's kind of silly, but it can definitely be confusing if you're not in the know. So today we're going to go over some common hunting terms and talk about what they mean. But first, I want to tell you the story of putting a stalk on an elk and how things got a little Western. When I was a teenager and still pretty new to hunting, a family friend invited my dad, myself, and my brothers out elk hunting. And we had never hunted big game before. We had hunted ducks and pheasants, but this would be our first time chasing anything larger than a bird. On my family friend's part, it was a good idea inviting us out because my dad has always been super active, and then there was myself and my younger brother, and we were around 15 years old, and so we had lots of energy, and it's just more legs to help pack out the elk if you get something, and we were excited to go chase elk. Personally, I don't know if I had ever seen an elk before. I may have seen one in a zoo or like a wildlife park before, but I don't think I had ever seen an elk in the wild that I can remember. And so I was excited to just go out and see some elk. Apparently there were hundreds of them living in Eastern Washington, and it was always a good time when we went out to Eastern Washington. So I was excited, but I really had no idea what I was getting into. The unit we were hunting was a true spike only unit, meaning you could only shoot these young yearling bulls that had spike antlers with no forks on either side. And you could draw a tag for a cow or for a branch antler bull, but the over-the-counter opportunities were for true spike elk only. And it makes it pretty tough because you have to identify closely this animal before you shoot it. In any bull unit, you could just see that the elk has antlers and you're good to go. But in a spike elk unit, you have to have the time to observe and make sure there's no little kickers or whatever you call them coming off the main beam. It has to be a smooth main beam. So we're specifically looking for these young yearling elk. And at this time of year, it turns out that spike elk are usually hanging out with these big herds of cows. And so in that sense, it does make it a little bit easier to locate them because if you can find a herd, you're likely to find some spike elk. Now, that's not always true. I've seen herds of 60 elk and there were no spikes in the entire herd. And that could be because there weren't that many to start with and then they were killed on the first day of the season. Whatever it is, it's not always true that you're just going to find spikes. But if they're going to be somewhere, they're likely to be with the herd. So that made it a little bit easier for us on the one hand, but it was still a challenging hunt just finding and identifying those spikes. So we started off, we're in Eastern Washington, and it's this sort of almost like a high desert area. It's in the rain shadow of the Cascade Mountains. And so you have rolling hills and sagebrush and grasslands. It's not the rainy, lush, green Washington that a lot of people expect when they think about Washington. They think about Western Washington and Seattle. Eastern Washington is completely different. So we're out in these giant rolling hills, and we start the hunt by hiking up a giant hill so we can get advantage and start glassing. And our family friend knows this area pretty well, and so there's a specific saddle that he wants to go up and take a look at. And saddles, if you're unfamiliar, are just a terrain feature that's marked by the low point between two peaks or the low point on a ridge. And so it funnels animal movement because if they're trying to cross the ridge or cross between the peaks, they're going to go to that lowest point where it's easiest to make it up and over that ridge. It's less work because it's lower, right? So we wanted to go up and look at this saddle, and that's where we saw our first elk. I can't remember if they were in the saddle or just near it, but we saw them in that area, and my family friend spotted them from maybe 800 yards off, maybe further, and told us all to get down. And then I remember looking through my binoculars at them and just thinking, wow, those things look like horses. And they're running in their particular elk way, kind of with their head up a little bit, but they just look like big, dark, horse-like animals. And I was surprised at how big they were, and also that we could spot them from so far away in that country. So those elk were not spikes. I think they were both cows, but we saw what direction they were running, and it was great to see some animals and know that they were there. And finally, for the first time, I knew what I was actually hunting for. So I don't remember all the details of that hunt. I don't remember if we went a couple days checking out different areas. But the part I want to talk about is on the day that we found the giant herd. So from where we were camping, we went maybe 4 or 5 ridges over, and we look into this beautiful valley. It's close to the Columbia River. There is just green in the bottom of this valley, even though the hills are brown. There's a river running through the valley. It's very wide in the bottom. And when we look down, there is a giant herd of elk. In my mind, I always say it was 200 elk. I don't know how many elk it was. It may have been 100 plus, but it was a giant herd. And there were all sorts of elk down there. I think the Eastern Washington seasons, I think we were hunting in maybe November. So it was a little bit later than some other elk hunting seasons. And it was when they started to herd up again. And so there were so many cows, uncountable cows. There were some big bulls. And then we would discover later that there was at least one true spike in that herd. Now, when I saw all those elk, my instinct as a new hunter was to just get down there and find something to shoot. But our family friend who knew what he was doing said, hey, let's wait here. Let's break out the spotting scope and let's try to find if there is a legal true spike in this herd. We want to make sure we know what we're going after. We don't want to have to climb all the way down this hill and rile up the herd just to find out that there's nothing there. So we stayed back and we start glassing and looking for a spike elk that we can go after so we can plan our approach. At the same time that we were hunting this herd, there were at least 2 other groups of people hunting the same herd, essentially. Coming from different ends of this valley, there were people on the other side of the valley. And so it was a high pressure scenario. The herd was highly visible. People knew where they were. And so we also had to consider the other hunters there and what they were doing. And it was all fair game. And it was a large area. So it's not like we were in dangerous proximity at that time. But there were other people all looking at the same herd. And so this herd was highly pressured. They knew there were hunters and they were ready to get up and move pretty much at any moment. And that's just kind of the curse of public land hunting sometimes. You're going to run into other hunters, especially in these short seasons near populated areas. You're just going to be competing with other hunters. That's just the way it goes. After a while of picking through the herd with the spotting scope, we determined there was a legal spike that we could go after. So my family friend says, all right, I'm going to take you and your brother, and we're going to go down and put a stalk on this elk. And this is what reminded me of this story today, because at the time, I had no idea what putting a stalk on an animal meant. I was thinking, Does he mean a stalk of grass? Are we marking the animal? Does he mean the stock of his rifle? Are we going to hit the animal? I mean, I really didn't know what he was talking about. And I was trying to figure out what we were actually doing to put a stock on the animal. But I have this habit of not asking questions and just kind of figuring things out by context, which is sometimes very helpful, sometimes not. So I figured I would just go along and see what happened. So our family friend grabs me and my brother, and I think the idea was that we were going to head down the hill, get into position, and if there was an opportunity, one of us kids would shoot the elk. So the three of us start down the hill, and we're using a fold in the topography to conceal us from the elk as we jog down. But anybody else above us, like my dad or the other hunters on the rim of this canyon watching the herd, can see us making our move pretty clearly. It doesn't take us too long to get to the bottom of the valley, and at this point, we get down on our hands and knees and start crawling in. And this is sort of a critical moment, right? We're hoping the wind doesn't shift. We can't actually see the herd yet because we're now on the same level as them, and there's a rise in the ground between us, and we need to creep up without being noticed. Any mistake now, or just standing up, could result in a bust. So we're crawling in, trying to get eyes on the elk before they get eyes on us. And with a herd of 100 elk, that's no easy task because there's just so many animals that could spot you. But we finally get to a point where we're just peeking over this rise, and I see an elk, I want to say 100 yards away, standing there with its head up. It's an image that's burned in my mind to this day. It's not a perfect picture. I don't know if it was the spike we were after or some other raghorn bull, but I just have this memory of seeing a beautiful elk standing alert in a scenic valley. And for a moment, everything else around me seemed to fade away. Then I heard three sounds in quick succession. The first was a gunshot, followed closely by the voice of a man shouting, "My elk! My elk!" The third sound was the unmistakable rumble of hooves as the entire herd of elk sprang to their feet and started to run. The hunter who had shot was running down the hill from behind us and to our left. After shooting the first time, he ripped off 2 or 3 more shots in quick succession and kept stumbling forward through the sage, shouting at us as he ran. At this point, we all realized the danger we were in, with bullets flying overhead and a stampeding herd that didn't know we were there. And our family friend grabbed me and my brother and sent us running back to higher ground. And I wasn't looking over my shoulder, but I imagine at that point, the elk noticed the three of us running away. And if they had been coming our direction, they must have changed course. The hunter who was running down the hill and shooting and yelling did hit an elk, but he made a bad shot. And after we got back up the hill, we watched the injured elk limp into a thicket as the rest of the herd escaped. And over the next hour or so, we observed as the hunter tried to locate that elk in the thick cover and finish it off. And it was kind of sad. I mean, it looked like the elk, if I remember correctly, it looked like it was hit in one of its back legs. And it took him quite a while to actually put another one in him and kill it. So it was a pretty frustrating experience, and it's an example of really rude and dangerous hunter behavior. And by the way, not characteristic of most hunters I've hunted with or I've encountered. Most hunters are completely respectful, and many of the hunters I've hunted with are some of the most generous people I know. So that's not characteristic at all, but it did happen in this case. And even though it's a negative experience in some ways, it's still something of a fond memory because it was one of my first elk hunting experiences. If nothing else, it was super exciting. There was danger involved, and it's kind of just a fun story to tell. Sometimes I want to give that hunter the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe he had been watching the elk from afar all day, and when we showed up down the valley from him, he felt like we were cutting him off. But it was a huge area. We were super spread out, and I trust that the adults I was with would have called it off if it seemed we were infringing on someone else's hunt. And really, there's no justification for shooting over someone's head while moving so you can claim an elk. That was obviously dangerous, and it shouldn't have happened. Anyway, it's a fun story to tell, and I always think of that memory as the day we got trapped on the battlefield. Bullets flying overhead, an army of panicked elk, generals surveying the scene from above, and the three of us making a hasty retreat. All right, guys, I want to pause for just a moment and ask if you enjoy this podcast, if you want to see it grow, please follow it on whatever platform you listen on. Take a moment to leave it a 5-star rating or a positive review. And every way that you help support this podcast will help more people get outside and into hunting. So I really appreciate the support. And with that, we will get into our terms for today. The terms I've chosen are not necessarily in any specific order. They are just some terms that are very common. There's a few serious ones, there's a few fun ones. I may do more hunting terminology podcasts in the future with more specific groups of terms, like maybe turkey hunting terms or deer hunting terms. But these are some of the ones that are used very often, and it will be helpful to understand. So the first two terms are from the story. The first one is stalk. And sometimes you'll hear people say, we're going to put a stalk on that deer or whatever it is. To stalk is just to creep in slowly, quietly, try to get in close enough to make a shot, especially with a bow. Get in close enough to make a shot without the animal spotting you or being alerted of your presence. Most people know what stalking is. It's just that funny thing that people do with jargon where they take a verb and turn it into a noun. There's plenty of times when we take a noun and turn it into a verb, but people will take a word like stalk, to stalk, and then make it into a noun, put a stalk on something. And it's a little bit confusing. I don't know why we do that. People do it in business as well. And honestly, it's kind of annoying, but that's what it means. And if someone says put a stalk on an animal, it just means we're going to go in and stalk it. You'll notice before I started that story, I also used the words how things got a little Western. And getting Western is also a term you'll hear a lot in hunting. It's similar to things went south. Getting Western just means things are falling apart. The herd is about to stampede. It's like a rodeo. There may be shooting involved. People use get Western, especially when they've made a bad shot and then they need to follow the animal, pursue the animal, and make a follow-up shot. So you might hear someone say, yeah, I want that extra ammo capacity just in case things get Western. And it just means just in case things don't go as planned and there may be some cowboy action involved. The next term I have for you is scouting. Scouting is a term you'll hear a lot in hunting, and it's very important. Scouting is a lot like hunting, but it generally means instead of going in and trying to specifically kill an animal, you're trying to find where animals are. So you're kind of exploring areas in a more general sense and in a less targeted sense is how I would differentiate it. So scouting is useful because it allows you to find animals and then create a strategy for hunting them. So say you have a 2-week elk season, right? That's not a whole lot of time to go out and kill an elk, but you do have time before the season that you can go out and scout and look for elk. So you might go out a month before the season, a week before the season, and start getting to understand the unit that you're hunting, the lay of the land, the topography features, finding areas where animals are or where you find lots of animal sign, which we'll talk about in a moment. And that way it gives you a better footing for when you start the hunt and a better foundation that you can build on when you're actually hunting. If you start hunting without scouting an area, likely your first couple days are going to be spent sort of in a scouting mode where you're covering ground, you're checking out new places, you're looking for where the animals actually are. So then you can get down to the business of getting in close enough to actually kill them. So scouting is super important. It's helpful because you can scout in lots of different time periods throughout the year. For example, white-tailed deer have pretty small home ranges. So if you find a white-tailed deer in the summer, it's likely that you can find it in a similar area in the fall when you're allowed to actually hunt them. If you're hunting ducks or waterfowl, you might go out and use binoculars to see where the ducks are landing on the body of water that you want to hunt. And again, you're not actually hunting them. You're not actually close enough to kill them, but you know where to set up the next day because you scouted and found a density of animals in the area that you want to hunt. So scouting is super important, super helpful. It's kind of the secret sauce in some ways. If you're coming from out of town and you don't know where the animals are in the first place, you're going to be way behind someone else who's local and who's able to go out and scout on the weekends, and they just know where the animals tend to hang out. It's kind of like having the home field advantage. When people talk about scouting, they may also use the term e-scouting. And e-scouting is just using maps on your phone or using resources on your phone or on your computer, on your electronics to scout remotely. So e-scouting might be getting on Onyx and looking at a map of the place that you want to go, and you're looking for the features that the animal you're hunting likes. So I've got spring bears on my mind. So if I'm e-scouting an area, I'm going to look for an area that has water in the bottom. There's drastic elevation change. It's very steep. There might be some cliffs on a south-facing slope that allows for lots of sun and early snow melt off that will then green up early. You're looking for thick tree cover near that slope where the bears can go and bed down and then come back out and eat when they want to. And so all of those features together would indicate a good spot for me to go and look for bears. And if you get good at using maps and e-scouting, it can help you pinpoint areas to go in and look for animals, even if you've never been there before. So e-scouting really has changed the game in a lot of ways. People didn't always have these maps on their phones, and so it's completely different than years ago where you kind of needed to go out and cover some ground to find these areas. Now you have aerial imagery and you can find a lot of good areas to hunt just sitting on your couch. If you want to learn more about using mapping apps for hunting, check out episode number 4 called Using Mapping Apps for Hunting. All right, another term you will hear often is stand. And sometimes people will be talking about a tree stand. It's often used in reference to deer hunting and also to predator hunting. So in deer hunting, a stand is just a place where you are going to go out and be stationary and wait for deer to come through. And I think it comes from tree stand, which is just a type of platform that you put elevated in a tree that you can sit on and then wait for deer to come through. And if you put it in the right area where deer like to travel or where deer like to feed, then a deer will come close enough that you can shoot it with a rifle or a bow. And having a tree stand specifically is helpful because it gets you off the ground. It helps get your scent a little bit off the ground. And also it helps just get you out of eye level of the deer so that it's less likely that they are going to spot you. So that's a deer stand. You'll also hear with coyote hunting and other predator hunting, people talk about making a stand or their stands for the day. And again, this just means a place where they're going and setting up and staying stationary. The difference between a deer hunting stand and a predator hunting stand is that usually in predator hunting, people are going out and calling for a certain amount of time. Maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's 45 minutes, maybe it's an hour and a half, whatever it is. But they will go out, and then often if no animals come in when they're calling, they will move to what they call their next stand. And these aren't necessarily places that have a designated place to sit or a tree stand set up. These are just places where the hunters decide is a strategic location to call from and hopefully be able to shoot any predators that come into the call. Another term you'll hear is blind, and blinds can take all shapes and forms. A blind is just something that obscures you from view of the animal. So it could be a pop-up blind, which is sort of like a tent that has a window that you can shoot out of, and the tent is colored green or brown or camo, something that just obscures the sight of the animal. It could also be a natural blind. It could be some sticks or logs or brush that you've piled up so that you can hide behind it. It could be a metal blind or sort of a more permanent blind. You'll see these at some duck hunting places where it's sort of like a little metal shed with a window, and the shed may have been covered up with some reeds or painted camo, but it's there permanently and you can use it to hunt ducks out of. So blinds come in all shapes and sizes, but they're just structures that help hide you from animals. The next term is sign. I mentioned sign when we were talking about scouting. Sign is just anything that an animal leaves behind that lets you know they were there. So sign could be tracks, sign could be poop, sign could be scratching or rubs on a tree. You may find hair, you may find feathers. All of that is sign. And sign is both very important and not that important. And let me explain why. So if you are looking for an animal and you find fresh sign, that's a great indication that an animal was just there. And that's very important because it means you need to be on the lookout. You might want to slow down and you know that you're in the right place. Now, if you find old sign, it might not help you that much. If you think about an animal walking around, let's say you take an elk. How many hoof prints can an elk leave in a day? It's a lot, right? Elk are getting in their 10,000 steps for sure. So I've realized that you should really pay close attention to fresh sign, but sometimes old sign is not that helpful and it's just going to be around. And you don't really need to slow down as much for old sign unless you are specifically looking for that or unless you didn't know the animal was in the area in the first place. But what you need to be looking out for are those fresh tracks or that fresh scat that indicates the animal was just there. If you're looking for sign, there's a good chance you'll be on public land, and that's our next term. Public land is pretty easy to understand. It's just land that is managed for and open to the public. Now, there's also sort of a special distinguishing factor when it comes to hunting between public land and private land, And some public land is not open to hunting. For example, many national parks or many national monuments are not going to be open to hunting. But lots of people will be looking for public land specifically because you don't have to pay anything usually to hunt there, and you don't need landowner permission like you would on private land. So, types of public land that are often open to hunting include wildlife management areas, game management units or GMUs, national forests, BLM lands, and wilderness areas. And there's others as well. If you are ever interested in finding out what public land is available near you, you can always give your game warden a call. Okay, next on our list is the term field dress. And this refers to dressing an animal to get it ready for cooking or eating. It's basically interchangeable with gutting. So once you've killed an animal, one of the first things you're going to do is go and field dress it, which means opening it up, getting the intestines and guts out, getting all the organs out that you can. And this helps to start the cooling process. It allows the meat to cool down. A lot of heat will escape out of the body cavity when you open it up and get those warm intestines and guts out. And it also helps you to start breaking down the animal into manageable pieces of meat. Now, there is a gutless method of field dressing animals in which you're not pulling all the guts out. And instead, you're basically cutting off the major cuts straight from the outside of the animal. So you will cut in through the hide and then take off each quarter, and then you'll take off the back straps. And eventually you may go into the actual body cavity to get the tenderloins and maybe the heart. But it's a way of kind of keeping all the guts and things contained, and it can make it a little bit faster than actually opening up the animal. And that would pretty much be considered field dressing as well. But generally speaking, it's just taking those first steps to break down the animal and start the cooling process in the field. The next term is also one I used in the story, and the term is pressure. Pressure is just when animals are being hunted by lots of different people, and they start to become more wary and start to do things that they may not normally do. So, for example, unpressured deer may have very defined habits. They may go to the same field to eat every evening. They may bed in the same place during the day for days in a row. But then hunting season starts, and all these people are coming in and encountering the deer, and the deer are running away from them. They are trying to avoid the hunters. And so all of a sudden, they are acting pressured. They are going to places that are harder to get to, places where hunters don't want to go. They are a little bit more alert and wary of hunters. You'll notice that if you go out scouting or just hiking in a season when it's not hunting season, animals will let you get a lot closer to them than they will during hunting season. So I've had instances where I was out scouting for deer in the summer, and I've gotten within 30 yards of the deer just hiking around. But then come hunting season, they will see you from 200 yards away and bolt. And that's a result of pressure. They know when the hunters are in the woods that they're in danger and they need to behave a little bit differently. Pressure is a fact of life when you're hunting on public land. And one way to use it to your advantage is to figure out where all the access points are and where people are going to be entering the public land, and then figure out where the animals go when that pressure happens. And if you can figure out those escape routes and hidey holes where the animals go, you can still have good hunting even when there's other hunters in the woods. That's easier said than done, of course, but it is something to think about when you're hunting in highly pressured areas. The next term on my list is zero. and 0 has to do with sighting in your rifle. You'll also hear it called zeroing your rifle. And sighting in or zeroing your rifle just means getting your point of aim to match up with the point of impact of your bullet. So the place where your scope or sight is aiming, matching that up with where your bullet actually lands. And it's called 0 because in a scope, you have a vertical and a horizontal line that cross in the middle. Those are your crosshairs, right? And that creates an X, Y axis. And the point where the lines cross is point 0, 0. So 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis. And that's probably the origin of the term 0. Nowadays, you will often hear, I have a 100-yard 0 or a 200-yard 0. And that just means your scope is sighted in for an impact at 100 or 200 yards. So if you have a 200-yard 0 and you put your crosshair on your target and you pull the trigger, your bullet is going to impact exactly where that crosshair is at 200 yards. Now, if you have a 200-yard 0 and you shoot at 100 yards, likely your bullet is going to land a little bit higher than where you're aiming. So that's sort of the practical use of zeros, and the term is pretty much interchangeable with sighting in your rifle. All right, here's a couple quick abbreviations. First, you've got ear pro. Ear pro just stands for ear protection. It's pretty simple. I don't like saying ear pro for some reason. It just rubs me the wrong way, but everybody will know what you mean if you say ear pro. It's just short for protection. You also have binos. Binos is just short for binoculars. And often you will use your binos to glass. And glassing just means using your binoculars or other optics to survey an area where you think animals may be. Glassing just refers to the glass components in optics. You'll also hear optics called glass sometimes. And glassing is a strategy that people often use to cover large areas. So you might go sit up on a ridge or on a peak somewhere and look over miles and miles of country. And if you have good binoculars or a good spotting scope, you can cover lots and lots of ground without having to walk through it and look for animals on foot. And it's a lot more effective than having to cover ground and hike. Glassing takes place at all different ranges. Some people will have high-end spotting scopes and they'll set up 5 miles from a place that they want to find animals and start picking it apart. Some people will have just their binoculars and maybe they'll set up a mile to 800 yards away and look at a slope and just start looking through all the bushes and all the trees looking for animals. You can even glass at close range. Say you're walking into a thicket, you can use your binoculars to sort of look past all the brush that's closest to you and focus on different layers of the forest. And that can help you spot animals as well, even at close range. Glassing is the main strategy component of spot and stalk hunting, which is our next term. Spot and stalk hunting just means, just like it sounds, that you are going to spot the animal and then you are going to find a way to move in closer to actually kill the animal. So spot and stalk hunting often happens in the West where it's a little bit more open and you can see animals from a distance away. That's how we were hunting in the story at the beginning. We were looking for elk from a distance away, and once we spotted them, then we moved in closer and finally made a stalk on the animals. Our final term for today is still hunting. Still hunting is a little bit confusing because it doesn't actually mean you're just staying still. Still hunting refers to a style of hunting where you move very slowly looking for animals, and it often refers to hunting in closer quarters or in a forest or someplace where you can't see as far like you could spot and stalk hunting. So when you're still hunting, you may take a few steps and then wait and use your binoculars to look, see if you can spot any part of an animal, maybe an antler, maybe an ear, maybe a horizontal back in vertical trees. And then after you have looked at everything you possibly can, you've waited for a bit, then you're going to keep moving. And it's just this slow, meticulous process of making your way through an area that you think has animals. And so you're not staying still, but you are going to have long pauses and slow, deliberate movements as you're still hunting. All right, guys. Well, those are our terms for today. Like I said, I may do more episodes like this in the future. So if there are any terms that you're confused about or you hear thrown around a lot, feel free to let me know and I'll be happy to explain those. I've got a pretty long list already, so I'm sure we'll do this again. In the meantime, enjoy the spring weather, get out hunting, and I'll catch you next week.